Hey everyone, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast where us backlog boys try to look at every single Best Picture winner in random order and try to figure out where they stand on our great big list of Best Picture winners, the very best. Well, that's what we're looking for here on the Quest for the Bestest. My name is Timo. I'm joined, of course, by Abram, Tucker, and Tanner. And today we are going way back, almost as far back as we can possibly go. And going to talk about the Broadway Melody, directed by Harry Beaumont, the second Best Picture winner ever, and first Best Picture winner to ever have any sound in it. So I think we will have a lot to say about all of those contextual elements, and I'm interested to hear what we have to say about the movie itself, because we're talking about the film and where it fits in history. But before we get to that, let's go to do a little recap about what happened last week. We had a great episode, if I do say so myself, talking about Green Book from 2018. A lot of very high-minded discussion. But the film, if you're curious about where it ended up, not super far up on our list, 44th place out of 56 for the whole list, with the average score of 5.9. So sitting a little bit above average on the numerical scale and certainly way below half on our list. Highly recommend going and watching that episode. A lot of good thoughts, a lot of good conversation and discussion in that one. And well, I'm going to hand it off to Tucker with our featured comment before we dive in and get a groove on, a little Broadway shindig going to talk about Broadway Melody. Tucker, featured comment.
Thank you. Today, here on the highlighted comment, I will read the Green Book comment from John Tour 11, who goes into Green Book saying that he went into this movie totally blank. He says, I had no idea what it was about. The way it tackled the subject might have been a bit bumpy, but it was still okay for me. I just find it sad how it was back then and still are today in many ways. Mahershala Ali and Viggo Mortensen performed the hell out of what they were given. They were both amazing, and their performances had a lot of heart. Loved it. 8 out of 10. And John Tor, thank you so much for being the one voice of reason in the BLB community. As usual. I mean, I'm not even counting myself in that.
True. If Tucker is nothing if not unreasonable.
Okay. Great comment. Thank you, John Tor. If you want to give your thoughts on Green Book or any of the previous movies we talked about, or maybe even the Broadway Melody, should you watch it and have some great epiphany, leave it down in the comments. We love to read them, and we'd love to hear you guys' feedbacks. And it might just show up on a future episode of The Quest for the Bestest. Okay, Broadway Melody, let's do it. Let's sing and dance our way to stardom in the city that never sleeps, New York. What did you guys think of this film? Can you give me...
No, that's Las Vegas.
Oh. Well,
the Big Apple.
This movie
that is going to be indicative of my ability to think about this movie.
It may have been the city that never sleeps, or the city that always sleeps, rather, because
this one,
the city that put me to sleep is what is portrayed in the Broadway Melody, because. You know, ever so often we'll venture back to the classical Hollywood era, the golden age of Hollywood, as some may call it. And, you know what, maybe we'll uncover a hidden gem from that era that, you know, many people our age aren't aware of. But sometimes we dig up a really, really boring and, in some ways, poorly made film that doesn't really hold up in a lot of ways. And I think that's what we've come across in the Broadway Melody.
Tanner, I could not have put it better myself.
Yeah.
This movie is fascinating for a couple reasons, but none of them are good. When I'm thinking about this film and the fact that this is probably one of the least popular and well-known Best Picture winners, I mean, I would say pretty easily. Most Best Picture winners have some amount of notoriety, but this film exists as, it was the second movie to win Best Picture, but that's really the only thing it has going for it. And I think going into this conversation, we've got a little bit of time crunch. We've got a little bit of stuff going on in the background. We had to reschedule. But how long is this conversation even going to be? What kind of stuff do we have to talk about with the Broadway Melody? Timo always starts with classic thing of, oh, we've got a very interesting movie today. And I was really hoping he would just come out and be like, we don't have an interesting movie today, because that's the first thought in my head.
Abram.
So sometimes I watch these movies for Quest in two parts, busy with school, whatever. And so I started this film late one night. I'm like, I got an hour into it. I'm like, this is Sunday night. Gonna call a night here. I'll finish it in the morning. I forgot that I hadn't finished this movie until this afternoon. And I think that's emblematic of this movie's entire ethos. It is, as the plot is happening, it goes in one ear and out the other, because I do not think this film is unmemorable only. I think this film is one of the most incoherent and pointless movies we've watched this entire show. I genuinely believe that the Broadway Melody is one of, if not the worst movie we've encountered on Quest for the Bestest.
Wow.
It's close.
There is the characters have no coherent motivation. There is no plot here. It is very technically rough. I feel like I can excuse certain facets of that, like the very bad sound mixing, because this was the first film with sound, so at a certain point you have to contextualize it that way. But if we're coming at this from 2021, I think that this movie is absolutely irredeemable. I do not think there is anything here of substance or value, frankly.
And I don't think there's anything that I remember about this movie besides from those contextual elements, outside of like the plot. I didn't know that this movie took place in Las Vegas. I thought it took place in New York.
No, it doesn't.
Where does it take place?
It's on Broadway. It's on Broadway. It is in New York.
Why were you guys yelling at me about
The city that never sleeps is Las Vegas.
Yes.
Right.
Oh.
You said that this takes place in the city that sleeps. I'm like, no, that's Las Vegas. And you're like, but I understand what you're saying there. I think that the plot of this film, as bare bones as it is obviously, I think, where we should start, just to give a little bit of context. This film follows the story of Hank and Queenie Mahoney, two performing sisters who show up on Broadway with their guy, Eddie Carnes. What's his relation to them? It's really unclear. He kind of gives them money and acts as their agent, but he's into both of them, and it's really fucking strange. And it's just their quest to try to make it big in Broadway, and everything that comes with that is the interpersonal strife that they have as they become popular and start to know people and have to do certain things that they might not necessarily want to make it big in Hollywood. But that's about as by the numbers of a Hollywood or actor plot as you can get. And a lot of this falls into the categories of, sure, yeah, that makes sense for a story. But aside from that, I think genuinely the only thing that this movie has going for it is Queenie and Hank are pretty charming characters. I like their relationship. I think both of those actresses do a very good job with what they're given. But they're just like a sparkle of fucking glitter in a bucket of mud.
See, what's interesting about that, Tucker, is that there actually are quite a number of plot threads here.
Sure.
Now, I totally agree that they're archetypal for this sort of narrative.
Yeah.
But it actually tries to juggle a lot of things. But it does that by throwing the balls in the air and then throwing its hands up in the air and watching them fall as they may. Because I think the most frustrating thing about the Broadway Melody is that for a linear narrative, it feels incredibly non-linear because there is no clear progression throughout the entire film. We go from this plot about the Mahoney sisters trying to work their way into this show, the Broadway Melody, to this romance, like love square-ish, where characters' relationships and motivations are always flipping, almost just for the justification of entertaining an audience. All of a sudden, Hank doesn't love Eddie anymore. All of a sudden, him and Queenie are married. All of a sudden, we're practicing for the show, and then all of a sudden, we're doing the show, and then it's a different number, and then the Broadway Melody doesn't even quite show back up. It's this grab bag of vaguely related sequences that don't build on each other, I don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With musical...
Go for it.
With bits of musical thrown in there, which, the way I think about this film absolutely comes from that it being the first Best Picture winner with sound, it being basically a silent film that has like 20 lines of dialogue added to be like, hey, look, we can do sound. And then
Well, they're talking the whole time.
Yeah, they have dialogue, but it's. I view this as totally. It's a film that they thought was going to be silent, and then they're like, oh, we can do sound. Well, now let's do sound. Tanner, I think.
That sounds like an in for a bit of trivia because most people who saw this movie most likely saw it as a silent film, as most theaters in 1929 weren't equipped with like sound equipment. Like they would mostly just have like a guy at the front playing the piano, da 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 da, that sort of thing. But yeah, so most people in 1929 or whatever saw this as a silent film, and I don't think the sound adds anything.
Well,
actually,
I
hang
think
on
it
a second.
certainly. I think it certainly makes the film more understandable.
Yeah.
We would not have been able to pick up on any of the story threads whatsoever if they were not talking, because and maybe there was a different cut of the film with more intertitles.
I think there was.
Yeah,
very
almost
sparing
certain.
use of intertitles in this.
Well, yeah,
would
I
make
think-
this film legitimately incomprehensible from every possible level.
I think
if there's no sound.
for obvious reasons, they don't put the intertitles in the one with sound, and the one without sound they would probably put all the intertitles in there. But also, the musical sequences are an interesting thing to think about in that aspect, because like do they just cut those out, or how do you convey that in a silent film? Because this was also MGM's first musical, I believe, because they had the capability to do this sort of thing.
Yeah, it's one of the first musicals.
Yes. And so I kind of wonder how that all rung out for the people listening to the silent version. But also, if you look at the one with sound, which I presume is the one that we all watched, musical sequences, no good. No good. Very forgettable. I could not name you a single song throughout this entire thing.
Well,
I could.
Yeah, I could as well.
Is there one
Broadway
called the
Melody?
Broadway Melody?
They sing it
Yeah.
like 5 times. What are you talking
I
about?
don't know.
I think that speaks to a critical failure of this movie, which is the musical element of it, which feels surprisingly backgrounded for a lot of the film, right? And so then when we get into these musical numbers, they feel incredibly underwhelming, because not only are we either rehashing Broadway Melody again, or maybe we're jumping to a different song, but they are not visually interesting. And I don't just mean in terms of the choreography, because I actually think there is some kind of fun choreography and set composition here on stage. But the film is really ugly a lot of the times. It does not play with light and shadow, black and white contrast nearly enough, to the point where some of those wide shots of the stage, everything just kind of fuses together, which is, of course, partially a side effect of this being a very old film we're trying to restore it. We're watching not a great restoration of it, but at the same time, the actual filmmaking did not help very much, because everything is presented in white or a little bit of gray in these scenes.
I think there's also a huge issue with I said this to Tucker, that like it's especially evident in those scenes where like all the chorus girls are practicing or whatever. All their faces are like super washed out. Like you can't see facial features at all on any of the actresses or actors at that end in those sequences. And yeah, I just like, maybe it's a poor restoration of this film, but at the same time, like maybe that stuff just doesn't hold up, because you can look at like maybe stuff with a better restoration. Like I recently watched The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which very much does play with the different shades of blacks and whites and makes everything pop when it needs to. And and it overexposes things when it needs to make things look ghostly in some sequences. But yeah, this one just fails like on every front.
And not even to
just
think
lacking
about
creativity.
Yeah, talk about the sets and how the sets are just like super, super bare bones. Like I can tell it's a set in a studio, and they're even in a studio set, they're not interesting. There's like a table and a chair, and then they walk around in there, and like the camera doesn't move, and we don't have different shots for most of the conversations.
Yeah.
It's just us watching them. This film is very proscenium arch. We see it through the lens of a theater audience, and only very rarely does the camera get to move around and do interesting stuff, or at least do the bare minimum, because proscenium arch is like so below bare minimum nowadays, and would become below bare minimum in like 2 years. Keep in mind that we've seen the 1930 winner, All Quiet on the Western Front, which does insane stuff with all of these things. And that really puts this film into perspective, I think, when comparing it to that one, which is the closest year one that we've seen.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, by one, so yes.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of this can be placed in context, and is why I don't take huge issue with the staleness and lack of creativity in the cinematography, because films of this era in the first, 3 or 4 years of sound existing had to be very static, because they only had one microphone that was sitting somewhere on the stage, and they had to speak at it in order to capture their voices. And so that really limited how much the characters could move. It obviously limited how much the camera could move because the camera couldn't. Oh, whoop! There's the microphone. Whoops.
Yep.
So a lot of that is technically limited. But when we are looking at this from the lack of everything else in this, like if I was really engaged by the characters or the particularly memorable dialogue or the performances or the story concept, I would be able to put that away a little bit more. But I think it is highlighted even more when you're sitting there trying to get a feel for the characters and the scenes, like, okay, what's going on? But then when you realize there's not a lot going on, your mind zones out a little more and you're trying to see, okay, what's going on with the set design, what's going on with the cinematography. And even on that layer, it also fails. So it's sort of a double hitter of lacking in both fronts that I think makes both even highlighted to be worse.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I disagree with you a little bit, Tucker, is because I just think that the movie tries to have a lot going on in terms of its characters, because we have to remember that these two sisters are in a love triangle with Eddie, unbeknownst to Hank, but at the same time, there's this guy, Jock, who's on the side going after Queenie.
Jock Warner, who is literally Jack Warner.
Well, yeah,
Warner
I'd like to get to
Brothers.
that in a moment, but go
Because the problem is they set up this complex relationship, but they just jerk you around for an hour 25. There is no development or progression, let's say, of these relationships until the absolute last minutes of the film, when all of a sudden we learn out of nowhere that Hank never loved Eddie and she was in it for the money, and then all of a sudden Queenie loves and then hates and then marries Jack, and then Jack tries to fight Jock, but then Jock punches him, and then they go away, but then Hank is unhappy, and then they're going to live together, and then Queenie's crying and the movie ends. There is a humongous problem of writing and pacing here, which perhaps is a symptom of this sort of dual release across silent and spoken film. But at the same time, if you're going to do that, don't write such a convoluted movie. And if you're going to write a convoluted movie, release it only in sound and actually carry a character arc throughout the movie. I don't know.
Very quick thing, because you brought up Jock punching Eddie in that sequence. That is one of the worst edited, worst cuts I've ever seen in my entire life. And like even then, I'm gonna compare it to another old film, the very limited number that I have seen, that does it better. Just look at like any Chaplin or Buster Keaton film where they have to like cut to hide
such.
They have to edit to hide something or like all that physical comedy and stuff. Those things are edited so much better rather than the punch going like, ha!
It's so bad that I thought I was watching this on Amazon Prime. I thought my video stuttered, so I rewound it. But it
you thought your disc was scratched.
It cuts.
Yes.
And then he leans in, it cuts, and then it's fucking flung back out the door.
It's really weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Abram also brought up Jock Warner. And I think there's another character who we're slightly more familiar with, or at least the character that he's supposed to be, who is, in this, it's Francis Zanfield, right?
Zanfield, yeah.
Zanfield's Dollies.
Yes, yeah, who is obviously a take on Florenz Ziegfeld, thank you. Ziegfeld.
Yep.
But at this, and I'm like, okay, so that's kind of fun that they're parroting these titans of the industry at the time. But also, like, what's the point? Like, they don't make them out to be especially evil.
There's
or
no commentary
stupid,
on them. They're not buffoons. They're not evil. They're just kind of doing the job.
They're just kind of guys.
Yeah. And even on that point, I honestly didn't expect them to be huge caricatures of these characters. But even then, they're not like famous. Like, they want to be in Zanfeld's Dollies because it's a good show, but it's not like, holy shit, this is supposed to be Florenz Ziegfeld, and the Ziegfeld's Follies are the biggest fucking thing since sliced bread, and yada, yada, yada. Like, there's no leaning into that because we are following their story. But I do think that, and I'm sure this movie exists somewhere, the idea of following a set of actresses who want to be in Ziegfeld's Follies and go through the trials and tribulations of that and have to, show their show and all of that, that could be interesting, but the fact is that we only lean into part of that story. And while I do think the part that we lean into is the most interesting aspect of this film, which is the relationship between those two sisters, who I do find to be at least somewhat compelling characters. The fact that it isn't supported by the external concept of them getting into the quote-unquote Ziegfeld Follies, it makes it a little bit empty. When we're introduced to Queenie and Hank, I think that's probably the best scene in this film.
I agree.
Them moving into the apartment and
They're
messing with the
wisecracking with each
bellhop
other.
guy.
Yeah.
And making the plans and talking about their past and all that. I think that there's a lot to like about these two characters. I think where their personalities fall flat and their character arcs is in context of their relationships with everyone else and how convoluted it gets. But on the bare level of Hank and Queenie Mahoney, I think they're both actually pretty interesting characters. And I think they both do a really great job, especially the actress who plays Hank, who is Bessie Love. I think she's really fun, and the way that you get to learn about these two characters and their dynamic of Hank being the older one who thinks she's a little bit wiser, she's sort of the brains of the operation, but she's a little bit too headstrong. She gets herself into trouble, and then Queenie's a little more reserved. Everyone kind of thinks she's dumb, but she's always got her eyes on the situation. Like, I think there is a really compelling set of characters there that are performed very well, but I only cared about that for like the first 30 minutes I was seeing them, because after that I was like, now they're caught up in all this horse shit, and we're basically just focusing on the men, because of course this is the 1920s, and we can't just have a movie about women. That would be ridiculous. And the misogyny just wipes their personality away, and I'm like, oh, that's really boring.
Yeah. Tucker, you brought up Bessie Love, so I'm gonna do a quick in that she was nominated for Best Lead Actress. I also think that she does a very good job as Hank Maloney.
Nope. No, it's just not her name. That's not her name.
Don't call her that.
Yeah. Also nominated for Best Director for Harry Beaumont, and of course this won Best Picture. Yeah, I don't know about the director either, but this is one of only 3 films in Best Picture history to win Best Picture and not win anything else. The other 2 being, excuse me as I try to find it here, Grand Hotel and Mutiny on the Bounty, both of which we've seen.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
And Mutiny on the Bounty is I need to go rewatch Mutiny on the Bounty. I love that movie.
Yeah.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, it's fun. Man.
Any other commentary on the Mahoney sisters? Am I out of line saying that I think they're pretty interesting?
No, I don't think so at all.
I think you're exactly correct, Tucker. I think that a thing that we don't really pay attention to nowadays, but their voices are pretty good too. They have different sounding voices, just the way that their vocal quality is. I think that helps them out in the. They don't sound like you would expect as actresses moved on in later years to have this, what is it, like transatlantic accent, that like way of speaking, the Broadway way of speaking. They don't have that in this, which is just I think it's interesting, for lack of a better word, and in its difference. It's not like the other ones that would come later, and so sure. I find that is. It's kind of a neutral point. It's not a great bonus, and it's not a great detriment either. I like their voices, and I can hear them most of the time.
Most of the time. Abram, anything to add?
I just don't think they're very good characters, but it doesn't come from the introduction as much as the fact that nothing happens with them, and when things do, it undercuts who they are, I think, in a lot of ways. I mean, effectively, Queenie becomes... Well, let's put it this way. The dynamic established is that Hank has the ability, Queenie has the looks, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then Queenie gets pursued for her looks. And then all of a sudden Hank is like, but you need somebody who's going to love you for you. But even Hank doesn't even love Queenie for Queenie in the context of how they're established, what their strengths are. I just think that this is not and that's an interesting thing that maybe Hank and Queenie would have to confront with each other. But this isn't a screenplay that has any interest in confronting anything below a plot level. I don't even think on a plot level it confronts anything that in a non-circuitous manner. And because of that, it just feels like somebody scrawled like on a cocktail napkin when they're having dinner planning the Broadway Melody. Hank, headstrong, Queenie, pretty, and exploited. Mm-hmm. And then nothing happened from there. And I just think that is I think that the script and the inability to communicate a character arc or plot tension or anything is the biggest thing defeating the film.
Yeah.
Because yes, the audio mixing is very poor. It's very hard to understand people sometimes. The audio peaks and is blown out quite often. The cinematography is not very good. But I really think it's the script that makes this all so much worse because it just becomes nothing at all to latch onto.
Yeah.
I mean, the writing of a film is really can be the most timeless aspect because other things are visually dated, but you can latch on to any story from any time period. But yeah, I think the heart of the issue here is that writing for Hank and Queenie because as I agree with Tucker, their introduction, I think Anita Page and Bessie Love have very good chemistry. I would venture to say that maybe they weren't given a script for that introduction scene, but I venture to say that maybe they just kind of had a little back and forth sort of thing because I think their chemistry is good and the character writing and the script writing for the rest of the movie on just falls so many rungs of quality below that.
Yeah.
I mean, I really don't have a whole lot more to add about the characters in that. It is so uninteresting, and as a result of the script being fairly nonsensical, that I just totally gave up trying to comprehend. And I'm like, I am watching this movie, but I am not able to pay very great attention to plot level events because it was just it's just nothing. It's nothing was pulling me in and being interesting. Even the music, I was like, okay. I listened to the Broadway Melody the first time it shows up in that sequence. Okay, musical sequence. Okay, we're watching a musical. We're into this, and then I'm like, oh, we just watched this shot sit still for 5 minutes while they sung the song. Okay. I hope they don't do that again. And then they did it again for the rest of the musical sequences.
With the same song.
Yeah, with the same song. I'm like, oh.
The one thing I have to say about the characters is our good boy Eddie Carnes, who is possibly the least interesting Best Picture character I've ever encountered. He is such a nothing weenie of a person. He just sits there and makes these fucking faces at things and comes in and he's like, no, but I want to be in charge here. I want things to be this way. And no one gives a shit and no one listens to him and he doesn't have charisma or power in scenes. Everything about this guy and frankly his performance as well and the writing of him leads me to really dislike this character.
Yeah.
Not because he's an asshole. I mean, he's not nice, but he's just so lame. He's possibly one of the lamest characters I've ever watched on film.
I think what's funny about that is if Tucker brought up the misogynistic overwashing of Queenie and Hank is that this guy is just a wet blanket loser for the entire thing, and then he just kind of continues to fail upwards. He just gloms on to Queenie and Hank as they climb the ladder of Broadway and become part of the Broadway Melody, and then he continues failing, realizes in the last 15 minutes, Abram said that oh, I should resolve the love triangle or whatever, fails to assert himself to Jock Warner.
He doesn't realize that.
Oh.
Hank literally slaps it into him.
Oh yeah.
She's like, no,
she tells him,
I don't like you. You should marry Queenie. What the fuck are you doing? And then he's like, oh, okay. And then he fucking scurries off into the shadows to go tell Queenie he's got the hots for her.
She tells him the lesson he is supposed to learn. He fails to come through on it when he gets socked in the face by Jock Warner. And then he just gets married in the end and everything ends up happy for Eddie.
With a weird time cut as well.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't see the wedding. We don't see them confronting the fact that they have, sort of pushed the sister to the wayside. There's elements of that could be interesting story-wise, but they're just boink. Oh yeah, we just got back from our honeymoon. How's it going, guys? Now you're gonna live with us, Hank. You're gonna live with us. You're gonna live with us. And it's it's really jarring to have to sort of recontextualize yourself in the next scene because they skip so much information that you're like, oh, okay, all right, I gotta readapt to this dynamic. Yeah, it's wild.
I guess, yeah, but my point is that, he learns nothing, he does not grow at all, but he still gets a happy ending at the end.
Yeah.
And he's a wet sock of a character.
Yeah.
He's very spineless. Very spineless. Yeah. That's that. I mean, I don't even know how many besides from Jacques, or Jock. How is
It's
his name?
Jock.
Yeah,
It's
I know
literally
Jock. No, but his
Like
last
the
name
strap.
Warrener.
Warrener.
Uh-huh.
Man, that's a cheesy rip-off name. I don't know if there's any other characters in the film that are even worth really talking about. Like Zanfield is in the film.
What about Uncle Jed?
Uncle Jed. I mean,
That's pretty
it's just
funny.
like these characters like,
kinda
zero
funny.
impact. They're like
Uncle Jed's whole thing is he stutters.
He stutters.
he can't
and
finish
it's
a
funny.
sentence.
Boy, howdy, is it funny.
We're forgetting one major character.
Who's
Okay.
this?
Yeah.
We're forgetting the Jock's drunk friend.
oh, dude,
Unconscious.
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 Okay, I loved Unconscious. He's awesome.
Well, you brought up Unconscious, Abram, and I want to get into some of the pre-Hays Code elements of this movie because Tucker and I recognized a certain little scene because it's used in the documentary, a very good documentary, called The Celluloid Closet, which is about, the history of the representations of LGBTQ plus people, characters throughout film history. And this film does have, as much as they can hint at it in 1920, which is, again, even if you can believe it, scaled back under the Hays Code. So you have the things like Unconscious. He sort of like he sort of trails off lasciviously after the wardrobe guy. The guy who's gay coded very obviously.
Yes.
The costume
Who's designing
designer.
all the costumes? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The inclusion of that character at all is another sort of pre-code element, as well as I think they bring this up in the Celluloid Closet as well, Tucker. The choreographer, like the main backstage lady, she's like sort of supposed to be this butch lesbian sort of caricature. So yeah, I mean, there's that. Maybe like the first ever hinted at LGBTQ plus characters in a Best Picture winner.
Yeah, I mean,
the
considering
first
there are
hints.
two,
Yeah.
so and we haven't seen Wings, so that could have who the fuck knows? But
True.
yeah,
If I can go through. Oh, sorry.
yeah.
Go for it, Timo.
Well, I was just going to mention that viewing this film in a production code lens is another way to look at it all. I don't think it adds to the enjoyment at all, but it does provide more food for thought than the plot does. So
Yeah.
a lot of the again, I think it's the context of this film and the fact that it obviously did. For the time, some people thought that it deserved the highest fucking award they could possibly get. Makes the film interesting from that regard, but it's very little to comment on the actual film, the content of the film, or the story, the characters, whatever. It's the context in which it sits that makes it worthy of note at all.
Does anyone have anything else to say? Because I do have some more interesting firsts for this movie, but
Okay,
I can save those for the end.
well, do you want me to? Do you
No
want me to?
thematic material, whatever.
I think
I
you
think that's
go
interesting.
for it, Tanner, because I was gonna.
Okay.
I have nothing.
I was gonna maybe talk about sound a little bit, but
Yeah.
I think we covered it mostly.
Bad.
So hit us with that trivia.
I mean, we haven't seen Wings, but I'm going to assume the first product placement ever in the Best Picture winner, and maybe one of the earliest ever insertions of product placement, the Lux soap flakes that are used. That they really make sure to turn that logo out towards the camera.
Oh yeah,
It was
pouring
this
that into
movie.
the sink, I think.
Yeah,
like wash clothes.
This movie was an advertising tie-in, and they used that that frame of the movie in like magazines and stuff to advertise Lux soap flakes.
Man, were I in the soap market in 1929, I think Lux would be my choice.
And this is the final one I'll leave you on. I'm gonna actually you guys a second. So
Oh.
we've been saying, it's the second Best Picture winner, the second Best Picture winner. Actually, there is a if I can get semantic with you, this could be classified as the first Best Picture winner, because at the first Academy Awards, they didn't have a Best Picture award. They had two. They had Best Picture, production, and Best Picture, unique and artistic production. So this was the first one to fall under the over-encompassing banner of Best Picture.
Yeah, which is why we have spoilers. Sunrise, A Tale of Two Humans, that exists out in the ether. That is going to possibly be included in the quest lineup in the future. But Captain Semantics, that's a pretty interesting fact. It's interesting that they turned that around so quickly.
Yeah.
Because frankly, the idea of having two sort of different pillars that films can be judged on is more interesting. And I'm excited to see both Wings and Sunrise and sort of see how they fare. Because I think what this film points out to me the most is usually we get one of these fucking stinkers and we're like, why did they vote for this? But this is one of the most notable films from 1929. 1929 was a really weak year history-wise. I mean, even looking back on it as someone who loves film history, like nothing. It's kind of scary how little there is.
Well, beyond film history and into just history-wise, 1929 did cause some problems in the money department. A hard year to make movies in general, given that like the entire economy like went into a huge tumble and
Great Depression of sorts, as I understand.
yeah, one of the
It was an
worst.
okay depression.
It was yeah, the sad depression. But so like I think there's historical context to why this film was the winner. I understand why it won. And all I can say is, well, I'm glad they don't make movies like this anymore.
They don't make them like this anymore.
They don't make them
like
like
they used to.
Yeah.
Thank
Good.
God.
Thank God.
Oh boy.
Oh man. Well, are we all out of things to talk about this movie?
I think we're out of steam here.
I
think it's score time.
I think it's score time. I'm curious. I'm curious to see what the score is gonna be.
I gotta remind myself what I gave
man,
this.
I'm gonna have to think about this in terms of our other low numbers too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man,
I
this,
got what I want.
man, this film really sucks, dude.
yeah.
God. All right, I've got my score. Are you guys ready?
I got
I
mine.
got plugged in.
3, 2, 1.
Oh,
Ooh, I see. Okay, all right. Oh, wow. Holy moly.
All right,
right.
and the suspense is over. It gets a 1.8 average score, and that's going to put it in the 56th place. It is going to go above Crash.
Hey, you know what? There you go.
You know-
and honestly, I think that's the perfect place where where I have it on my personal ranking as well. I would rather watch Crash than this because Crash is more interesting, but it's better than I hate Crash more than this.
Yeah, I hate all the characters in Crash more when I'm not supposed to. And I can at the very least say I can rewatch that introduction of the Mahoney sisters and not hate them, which cannot be said for any character moment from any scene or any second of the movie Crash.
Except for the scenes with Ludacris in it, because I love Ludacris in Crash.
Well, I disagree.
The point breakdown for that 1.8 average score, starting at the top, Tucker gave it a 3.2, followed by Tanner's 3.1. We get to jump a good number of points down to Abram with a 0.5, and I gave it a 0.3.
Wow.
The lowest ever score given on Quest.
Yeah, man,
Historic.
This film was. There are so many reasons why this film was bad, and I can never force myself to watch this movie again. I think that's basically what's gonna.
And you don't need to. You
Yeah.
don't need to, especially because your thoughts are recorded here for the internet and the rest of history to see. That's
For
what I'm using
time-
this episode as.
Yes.
As a time capsule for me to put my thoughts out on the internet so I can go back and listen to it if I need to. But really quickly just get my thoughts on this movie out of my head because I do not need to use my fucking RAM to store information about the Broadway Melody.
Yeah.
There you go.
I'm pretty happy where this is going. This is where I wanted it to go, one above Crash. Even though my vote was not helping that, I think it all.
Oh yeah, I'm curious about that. I mean, you think Crash is like 6 times better than this? So do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, my 1.6 for Crash versus my 0.3 for this. I think, I don't know. This film, the sound and the sound is just so god awful in this movie. Like there are scenes where, you know, it's like not the filmmaker's fault, which is part of why I'm like because like it's just the technology. The technology was just super new, and they were just learning how to use it, and they had to. They had the question of, okay, now that we have sound, what is a movie? And they're still totally figuring that out in this film. And yeah, the dialogue is nigh unintelligible a lot, and so it's just like technically there's nothing. Story-wise, there's nothing. Like
Yeah.
I was so bored. I was so bored watching this movie. Like it's
This
hard
is
to
easily the most bored I've ever been watching a Best Picture winner.
Yeah,
hard to
doubt
really
about it.
Well, hang on.
describe properly bored I was watching this.
I guess I didn't fall asleep during this one, but it could have had to do with the hour of the day that we watched it. But
This one is a
regardless.
lot. We've watched, in my opinion, a lot more boring movies than this. I think this has the hour 40 on its side.
True.
Sure.
And this movie does move. A lot of things happen, but consequently nothing happens at the same time, which is why I think it's so tedious of a watch. You always jump into a new scene, something, but it doesn't go anywhere. And I think you can make an easy case for, in my opinion, this movie being as bad as Crash, but for a different reason, right?
Sure.
I just think that it is so far below by every metric that it just, in a show about looking for the best picture and using best pictures as a scale to compare to one another, this can't even get a full point for me. I don't think it deserves it. And yes, you can contextualize that within history, but this is not a show about reviewing these films as they would have stood in their respective years.
Yeah.
It's 2021, and good try.
Sorry, Harry Beaumont.
Sorry,
What
Harry
makes this
Beaumont.
film most interesting to me is I think they kind of got a redemption moment a couple years later, because The Great Ziegfeld is this film, but leagues better. I frankly, in retrospect, I think we were a little bit too hard on The Great Ziegfeld. I think that a lot of the elements of that film take the thematic and story concepts of what this film wants to do. Florence Ziegfeld is so much more interesting of a character. His performance is so much more compelling than anything in this film. It actually has scale and choreography and set design. Like, every element that this movie is mediocre on, that it tried to do well at, Great Ziegfeld just knocks it out of the park. And while we, our points are still there, Great Ziegfeld is not moving up, I do think that this movie makes me appreciate what Great Ziegfeld did a lot more. Because while that film dragged, it was at least impressive from a lot of regards. And this film just does not have that. Even the choreography sequences are not that great.
No.
Like, the girls on stage, dancing girls, are not actually in sync a lot of the time. And I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
how do you... This is like the one thing you're supposed to be selling the show on. It's like quality choreography and like Broadway bop. Huh? How'd they screw this up? And they did. And it's really strange.
It's a weird one. It's a weird movie. My head is so empty of thoughts. So let's just move on and find out what we're gonna do next week, because let's fingers crossed it's better.
Yeah. I should have prepared some sort of vaudevillian sort of wheel song for this, but I didn't. So your folks are gonna have to settle for the old regular. If you didn't get worn out on the Broadway Melody in the Broadway Melody, you surely won't get worn out on this.
The old ball and chain.
Yeah.
That Quest anthem.
Wheel, wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital? Is it on real? Wheel, wheel, what's your deal?
And our number is number 29.
Ooh.
That's pretty far back in our in the time sphere. I don't have any clue what decade this is in. So Tucker, will you tell us what decade it is?
I shall elucidate. Not today. Well, next week, we will be discussing a film from one of the directors that we've watched the most of on this show. This comes from a 3-time Best Picture winner, which I believe is the highest number of any one director to win Best Picture. This comes from the year of 1942, starring Teresa Wright, Walter Pidgeon, and Greer Garson. We're going to be watching William Wyler's Mrs. Miniver.
Oh, interesting.
Not a particularly famous film. I mean, I don't dissuade you from feeling bad. Like, of course you don't know about this film. I think it'll be interesting to watch, but even as a film history buff, I know nothing about this film. So
William Wyler is a good director, and I've liked the movies that we've watched from him for the show.
Yep,
yeah,
it's
another.
another.
Ben-Hur and Best Years of Our Lives are both top tier.
Yeah.
It's another
He's
World
1 for
War.
2.
It's a World War II. He's 1 for 2 on Abrams.
He's
marks.
1 for 2. Yeah.
So it's a World War II film.
Oh, you liked both those movies. Those are both good movies. You wiener.
Maybe it's in comparison to the Broadway Melody. Oh yeah, top tier.
So we are gonna watch this film, and then we're gonna come back on the show and talk about it next week. I can't wait to hear some thoughts. We'll see. This should be a film to watch. William Wyler, great director. So can't wait to see what he's got in store for us. And I think you know what we've got in store for you next week. It's this Mrs. Miniver from 1942. Thank you guys for sticking around for this review. It's a little shorter, but you can probably
That's
guess why.
fine by me.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We'll catch you next time. Peace.
Sounds like shit. I think Timo will appreciate this.
Yeah.
Because Tucker already knows. Sounds like shit is my famous review for the Dickinson sound experiment, which is the first.
No, it's mine actually.
No,
My
it was
review came out
mine
first.
first, you son of a bitch.
My review came out first.
I'm gonna hack your letterbox and delete that review.
He was like, "Oh, I've got a great idea for this review. Sounds like shit." And then I immediately went to Letterboxd and wrote the review. Sounds like shit.
After mine, by the way. I got it
No,
in first, too.
I